great apostles of Rome, Peter and Paul. The expected parousia, Jesus' expected second coming, hadn't arrived, and people were discouraged. The Emperor Nero had blamed the burning of Rome on the Christians and persecuted and decimated them. Perhaps the few remaining Christians were wondering why they must continue to being made sport of in the arena by being fed to the lions. It looked as if the church was doomed. Today's two parables provide an insight into Jesus' kingdom on earth and its growth. Jesus' first parable of the seed on the surface tells us of nature's mysteries of life and growth. The farmer's seed sprouts, grows, forms leaves, and gets itself ready to produce. With no one understanding exactly how it happens, aside from helping it along by watering, fertilizing, weeding, and as the Galilean farmers certainly knew, by driving away crows. Take a field of corn, for instance. From a small seed, it grows in 8 weeks to a plant with more than 1,400 square inches of leaf surface, one of the most remarkable feats of growth in the plant kingdom. And in that time, the plant establishes a root system that, if laid end to end, would extend a distance of 7 miles. In ideal weather, the plant often grows as much as 4 inches a day, giving rise to the legend that you can hear corn grow. Jesus' parable of the seed is comparing natural growth with our soul's growth in grace. Nature's growth is often imperceptible. We can see it only by using a time-lapse camera or by returning to the field at different intervals. So too is the spiritual life. Nature's growth is constant. It takes place night and day, day and night, whether people are awake or asleep. In contrast, human spiritual growth is spasmodic. One day we may take a giant step forward, the next day a baby step backward. Nature's growth is inevitable. Human spiritual growth is anything but. There's nothing so powerful as nature's growth. Seeds born on the wind far from their source will grow. Sprouts will shoot forth around boulders. Tree roots can split concrete sidewalks. Weeds push through the cracks in asphalt. Lilacs grow in crannied walls. Human spiritual growth, though less visible, is no less powerful. More things are wrought by them than this world dreams of. With nature's growth, there's a consummation, a crop. At harvest time, the produce is separated from the weeds. In the spiritual life, harvest time is a term for judgment. The main lesson in that, although we don't always perceive God's action and sometimes think God has abandoned us, God never ceases to act. Jesus gave his equally brief, simple, and homey parable of the mustard seed, which he called the smallest of all seeds of the earth. It really isn't the smallest. Orchid seeds are smaller, but was proverbially so in Palestine, and Jesus accommodated himself to his audience. But that isn't the point. As with the first parable, this one contains several points. The grown bush has large branches so that birds can dwell in its shade. A common Old Testament way of speaking of a great empire was to describe it as a full and leafy tree that reached far out, with its tributary nations finding shelter in it like birds. Despite its insignificant beginnings, the kingdom of God has grown tremendously and will continue to grow. It too reaches far out, giving shelter to all races and nations of people. Truly, the kingdom of God in the Gospel's two parables is the rule of God in our lives and the way God works among us. Mustard was ubiquitous in first century Palestine. It was everywhere. So too, the kingdom of God breaks out everywhere. The kingdom of God is everywhere around us. Another point of the two parables is that we should not be daunted by small beginnings. As with the little mustard seed, we need patience and participation. We sometimes think and feel that our little bit will make no difference, but it does. In voting, in speaking out, in a small kindness, in a friendly smile. Every little bit can contribute to huge results. The prophet Ezekiel, like Jesus, used stories to teach. A remarkable prophet who lived during the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BC, he expressed hope for his people. Today's story is an allegory. Through symbolic fictional figures and actions analogous to real-life situations of truths about human existence. Today's passage from Ezekiel is a foretaste of the parable of the mustard seed. Ezekiel told his fellow Jewish captives, weak in power, insignificant, and small in number, that someday this twig of a nation would become, through the Lord's power, a huge and noble cedar. In Ezekiel, as in Jesus' parables, God shows God's love for the tiny, the unnoticed, the most vulnerable, all of which God makes into the great, the remarkable, and the strong. While we live, we are to be aware of the mystery of growth. This mystery is within us as well as all around us. For us, it applies particularly to our growth as persons. Our readings today indicate that our growth comes from God, but we're responsible for working it out. God reveals God's power with those who, in human eyes, are seemingly insignificant and poor. We, walking by faith, should be the channels of God's power in a world where there are so many people who are exiles, refugees, despised, outcast, homeless, hungry, and sick. The critical issues in whether we receive fullness of life are receptivity in faith, openness to God's action within us, confidence, and prayer. That indeed is the key.